This episode is not about javelins. It's not even about Olympic medals. It's about a decision. Because today I'm joined by Steve Backley OBE, one of the most consistent performers British athletics has ever produced. Multiple Olympic medals, a former world record holder, a man who didn't just peak once, he stayed elite across decades. But here's the real question. Why do most people perform once and disappear, while others stay at the top of their game year after year? In this episode, we break down the mindset behind sustained excellence. We talk about thriving under pressure, not just surviving it, why success is a decision, not a gift, how to control the controllables when everything feels uncertain, and why moving the stick just 1 metre further is the difference between average and world class. If you're an estate agent who wants to step up, not just talk about it, but actually step up, this conversation will challenge you. Steve Backley OBE, thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
Thank you, John. My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Right, and do you know what? Listen, I want to preference something straight away because I think this is super important. Before I joined EXP, there were a number of people that said, look, you know, this is a really good opportunity. You need to be part of this. This is growing. This is probably where agency is. Do you know what? If you don't want to work for anybody else, come and do this. And if you're willing to back yourself, you should do it. And for a few years, I wasn't backing myself. I wasn't getting involved. But when I spoke to Adam Mackay, and he told me when I interviewed him on the podcast of like afterwards, I spent about 3 hours on a call with him after recording the podcast and talking about what he was doing, what he was planning. But the thing is, the thing that really tipped me wasn't just that, it is who was inside his sphere of influence.
Okay.
Which was Steve Backley OBE. And Roger Black. And that was the thing that tipped me over the edge because, of course, you know my background, ex-parachute regiment, but also it's easy to fall back into society's norms and then just become the same as everybody else and not really have that mindset to push, drive and achieve stuff. I mean, that is exactly why I become part of EXP. But let me just ask you a very quick question, right, to start the show off. You're one of the most consistent performers in British athletics, right? The British athletics has ever produced, and you've delivered at major championships year after year. But what mindset allowed you to maintain that level for so long when most or a lot of athletes peak once and then sort of disappear?
Yeah, John, look, thanks for inviting me on. Really looking forward to getting into this stuff. It's where I live and love and have dedicated my life to possibly asking and attempting to answer that question for the last 40 years, 20 years in practice, 20 years since retirement. And if we're to boil it down, I guess I would say something along the lines of success is a decision, not a gift. And I've used that phrase previously in a different context, but I really mean that. And I think a lot of people don't step up because they don't necessarily have to, or want to, or can, or see the opportunity. You use the phrase back yourself. I think, with Roger Black, we've been working for 20 years now in the performance space, helping individuals, teams and organizations develop themselves. And there comes a point in your career where you have to step up, right? You have to go, I don't want to be ordinary. I don't want to be average because that brings me X, Y, and Z. The consequences, the implications, the outcomes that come from that mindset are, thus. So where do you want to be? And that therein lies a whole sort of gambit of stuff. So getting ready for a championships, to answer your question, there's a lot of things in your control. There are a lot of things that aren't in your control. And part of getting that right is making sure that you apply your energy, time, focus, dedication, and respect to the things that you can control and influence, and letting the rest go. So adversity, for example, I loved it. It's raining, there's headwinds, there's delays, because half the field gives up. And you go, well, that was easy. I've beaten half of them. So I practiced for adversity. to make me more resilient, to be more tenacious, control that mindset when your brain goes, "Oh, I'm not sure I can do this," and you go, actually, that's simply a mindset shift, and it's why the parallels back to ordinary life, if we can call it that, real life, are apparent from sport. Not saying it's the same, but very much, insights from that world of getting ready as you observe for a championships and getting it right. And it's not guaranteed, right? We use the phrase "make it as likely as possible" because we can't often control the outcome, but we can certainly influence it, and we can certainly control the controllables.
Did you get like almost used to winning and almost used to, you've held a world record. You've like won again major championships. You've been to the Olympics. You're always at the top. Was it almost like, I'm here, this is where I belong, I have now got the belief? Or,
If I were to say that out loud, John, it almost sounds arrogant, but there is an element of that, of you have to, of course, feel as though it's justified and that you're not owed something, because that makes it seem quite high maintenance. But I think that sense of, I tell you what it is for me, John. I love competing. Right? I love competing. Now, it doesn't make, and there's a massive misconception here, because I don't have to win. I don't have to win. I love it. You and I, whatever, penny up the wall. Great, you win. Brilliant. Oh, well done, John. Let's go again. I love the locking horns and the challenge that the arena and the platform, the stage, the theatre of what competition is. Now, in sport, of course, it's very transparent. You go from maybe school to club, club to county, county to regional, regional to national, and you're going up rungs on the ladder. And of course, you'll be winning the majority of the time, but there's always someone out there bigger and badder and better. And that makes it, so you can't assume. And, you just you find a new battleground, you find a new set of circumstances to apply and test your own, abilities. So, winning's important, and it's striving too, but it's what goes around it that I'm most passionate about.
And so, of course, in the world of agency, right, for me, it's, I don't know, losing an instruction that I thought was dead cert, or maybe at the 11th hour, at the point of exchanging contracts, it falls out of bed. I've got to say that's very, very, very rare for me, but it can happen, right? But in your world, that's injury. How do you, or not just injury, it's, for example, I don't know, competing against, I don't want to butcher his name, Jan Zelensky?
Yeah, it's
right?
probably
So
closer than mine.
Yeah, you're going up against somebody who is also at the very top of their game, and you may lose the instruction to him. You may have the injury that is the thing that stops you competing. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think you deal with it in the same way as the win. You control the habits, you control the process, you control the controllables. I think I used the phrase a second ago. And I think, the outcome is often out of our control. And I think quite often we're judged through the outcome, when the reality is we should be judged on the performance. I've had championships where I've overperformed and been beaten, thrown an Olympic record, most famously in the Sydney Olympics, and was beaten by a matter of centimetres late in the competition. Came away with a silver medal. Now you kind of go, okay, is that success? That's an Olympic record. I mean, geez, 99 times out of 100 would be enough. Conversely, I've had times when I've, performed pretty averagely for me and won a Commonwealth Games, or maybe Europeans even. So the outcome is part of it. Getting the instruction, losing the instruction, winning the instruction, and I think the challenge, working in a state agency now, as Roger and I are, is you don't have that transparency, do you? You don't really see the performance. You do as the agent. You know what's gone on behind the scenes because you've put in those hard yards or not. And I think it's one of the challenges of the industry is that lack of transparency. I'd love to. By the way, we'll talk about this another time, but I'd love to do that. We need a trip advisor, feedback, something to judge my agent, rank my agent, give them a score. Because Roger and I lived in a world where the whole world's watching. You're at the Olympic Games, 1 billion people watching and judging. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, he seems a bit nervous. Oh, look at, you just prepared for 4 years for one instruction every 4 years. Imagine that. You've got one go. Imagine one massive house. Imagine you're selling Buckingham Palace once every 4 years. And that's what it's like being an athlete, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you're right. The consequences, I think, is the challenge. But making it as likely as possible. I'll come back to that phrase.
Yeah, but as a consistent medal contender, right? And you've just mentioned the expectation of 1 billion people watching you on TV, right? I don't know how I would cope in front of mum and dad, right? So expectation has followed you in every major championship. Did you learn to use pressure as fuel, or did you develop ways to manage and contain it?
Former. And I say that, there are, there's wonderful literature on this, and there's 3 types of people in this world, as far as I understand it. And this isn't my work; I'm regurgitating. But there are people who fold under pressure. There are people who are stable under pressure, and they're good. They could be good. The really interesting ones are those who thrive under pressure. And that is again, I come back to controlling the controllables, managing expectations, allowing adrenaline, because it's a wonderful stimulant to drive us to better things. To give you an insight, right? So I was a javelin thrower. I threw an 800-gram javelin. It comes out your hand at around 70 miles an hour, which is 30 meters per second. About the top 5 people in the world can make that happen, right? And it's 2.5 meters longer. So you have to line it up. So you're the precision at speed and power. You get an insight to the event. Dealing with that under pressure and being able to thrive, that pressure of an Olympic Games, World Champs, just a competition, is worth, and we could measure this because it's so objective what we did, around 10 to 12%. Right? So put that into real terms as a javelin thrower. If I could throw 80 meters in training, I'd throw 88 meters in the competition. Now, that's massive. It's massive in a performance context when it comes down to centimeters winning or losing. Imagine that compounded. We have that available slack available to us every day if we want it. I'm not saying we should, because if we went after it every day, probably burn out, right? But there's a 10%, and that's on top of your absolute maximum in practice, absolute maximum. So that fascinates me. And that's a mindset, and again, transferable to any industry.
And put that into perspective, you see like goalkeepers in the Premier League, some of which can throw the ball to the halfway line. You're throwing a javelin almost the entire length of a football pitch.
Yeah, and give or take. Yeah,
but the point is that it's not just as simple as that, though, is it? It's learning obviously tell me, obviously you're the Olympian, I'm not, but I'm imagining it's not just mindset as well. It's also practicing technique. It's also tempo. It's also thinking I'm running very fast up towards a line that if I go across, I'm going to obviously be a no-throw or potentially be disqualified or whatever. There are so many different facets to what you're doing. And of course, mindset surely is the thing that sort of underpins all of that, sets the foundation of actually all of that training. Is that right? Would I be fair in saying that?
Well, yes. I think, there are 3 component parts. As I think it's fairly well understood that there are 3 component parts, mindset, behaviors being one of them. The other 2 being knowledge and skill. So, we practice our skills to be able to do what we do, and we have the knowledge to do what we do. And I could be talking about an estate agent or an Olympian. That third mindset piece is where Roger and I apply our focus. And mindset is purely a collection of your habits. That's really what we're talking about is how we develop a culture through habits and how we affect that. And I think the the most relevant piece of work that's ever been done on it is that is this growth mindset piece that many people will have heard of. There's only two types of people in the world. There are those who have a growth mindset and those who have a fixed mindset. And I think that really challenges us when we make decisions, when we make assumptions, when we react to within a conversation in a certain way is almost a check-in with ourselves. Am I adopting a growth mindset? As in, can I do this better? What else is out there? What am I missing? A growth mindset, internal conversations. We've always done it this way. Oh, I've done my best, can't do any more, a fixed mindset concept. So that principle, I think, when I come back to, and as you outline, the mindset piece, I think is the most relevant, the most compelling, and the simplest, because there's no need to make this complicated. All we're doing is raising the bar. Where am I now? Okay, where do I want to be? Let's put some stepping stones to get there. That's keeping that simple is important. But yeah, I agree with you. Mindset's everything if all else is equal.
Yeah. And so just a very sort of quick story from me, and I think that this could be relevant to mindset. I remember, so I used to play golf, right? It used to be like always over Little Wormwood Scrubs, lived on a council estate, and that was my golf course in the morning, all self-taught. And I was about 15, 16, got my handicap down to 5, and it was amazing, right? However, I played on a public golf course in Ruislip. The first hole, loads of people are waiting. The hole was only about 270 yards, and I was about 14 years old, but it was really narrow. So most people would just play short and then just basically try to get the ball on the green. Very few people went with driver. So there's people on the green, and the course pro came out and he went, "Well, you just take your shot." And there was about 50 people watching. And I was like, "Oh, there's the challenge. All right, then." And so really narrow, got the driving range going down the left-hand side, the big fence. So obviously you don't want to hit into that. And then trees down the right-hand side. Anyway, the people on the green jumped out the way of my ball, right?
Brilliant.
And he was like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that." Now, fast forward just 18 months when I'm playing in my first club championship, right, as a junior. And now the gallery is about 100, 150 people, all these people watching, big tournament, all the rest of it. I took 14 shots on the first hole. And I took 5 off the tee because I didn't have that, "I'm having this is exciting, this is brilliant, this is wonderful." I had that real massive level of anxiety, which sort of puts me on to my next sort of question, really, which is very few athletes could do what you do, in the sense that they stay world class across multiple Olympic cycles. What did you do mentally to keep progressing when others plateaued or burned out?
I suppose I've touched on it partly there with that growth mindset, because that humbling experience that you've just outlined happens to all of us, right? We've all been there. We've all felt what that feels like, and it's horrible. And it isn't about that happening or never happening again. It's coming back to the point, let's make it as likely as possible. What is within my control that I could do to stop that happening again? That kind of internal dialogue. So I think, the perception of, I've always said this about, Olympic athletes, because it's quite great, Olympic athletes. And my perception of Olympic athletes is, they're always confident, they're always positive, they never fail, they kind of wake up every day and do 1,000 press-ups, and, you can't, come on, get over yourself. Of course that isn't true. Of course, real people, real fears, real doubts, real anxieties, real pressures, dealt with failure. But it comes back to that principle of, okay, that happened. What did I learn? What can I do about it going forward? And even the best of the, in any industry will have had that similar experience to what happened to you on the golf course. Been there. I've been there in the javelin, I've been there in the event that I, conquered, dominated, whatever you want to say, got to world record. Okay, great. But it's only about what happens next. And quite often what we find is the most vulnerable is when you're successful, right? Because the alarm bells stop ringing, you get complacent, that's when your guard's potentially down, and that's when error can creep in and complacency can creep in and assumptions can creep in, and then you drop the ball. So I think it's a real fine balance between being driven, being hungry, being confident, and then I'm starting to spell out the softer core skills that we focus on, that we feel are important, and just keeping them in check, nothing more.
So I was told a story recently of an agent who got to a point where now their debts are paid, they're working for themselves, debts are paid, but they panicked. Goals wise, would you say in that situation where they've panicked and they go, what's next, what's happening next, and then they're suddenly becoming, they've seen lost. What did you have goals? Was one of your goals, right, that's it, I'm going to break a world record until I've done it? Or was it a case of, I am just going to go until I cannot throw this javelin more than 88 or 87 meters, or, or 80 meters in training, I'm going to give up. But until that moment, I'm just going to just go as far and as I could take this. How do you work with goals?
So I was very fortunate as a kid. My first coach was my dad, right? And the interesting thing is he didn't know one end of a javelin from the other, but he coached me, and he was a runner. He was a good runner, so he knew the principles of hard work and training. And we went with a javelin to a field where opposite the house where we lived. I was only 14 years old, so I was kind of going, how do I hold this thing, let alone throw it? And what he did, this was genius, right? He scratched a line in the grass. He put a stick in the field about 25 meters away. It was just in front of me, and encouraged me to get past the stick, right? And it might take 2 throws, 10 throws, 10 days, 10 weeks. But I went back and I knew where that bloody mark was, and I made sure I got past it, right? What he did when I went past it, he moved it an arm's length down the field, right? And I didn't, he did it through not knowing what else to do, really. It's the principle of coaching, training, right? It's a stretch goal. We crept, John, from 25 meters to 78 meters in that field, right? With that simple principle of having a goal that was just beyond where I am. So I come back to the principle, and possibly, and I mentioned it a minute ago about, you reach your goal, you get success, you're vulnerable. Because where do you move that stick? Where do you put it? And it really, when you boil it down, it's all that matters. Any agents out there listening, any sports people out there listening, or whatever industry you're in, what's your field? Where's your stick? Where are you going to put it? Where are you going to put that stick? Are you going to put it 90 meters down the field when you can only throw 25 meters? I wouldn't encourage that. And it's where the coaching can come in. Put it somewhere relevant. And when you get to it, move it down the field. And I know that's very metaphoric, and there's a lot of detail that comes within what we're talking about. But that principle, I believe, stands true. And to answer your question, sorry, it's a roundabout way, I live by that. Where am I? I massively value time. Time is my biggest asset, and money buys you time. So a lot of my investment work, and I love it. I love working with the people I want to work with, and with real agency, and working with yourself, Roger, and Adam, and the team. I love it, right? Because we're working. No dickhead policy is brilliant. Love that, and let's keep that club thriving. And so yeah. Look, goals now are less clear. I mentioned this earlier, transparency in sport is a wonderful thing, but you can't get away from it. Gold, silver, bronze, on the rostrum, off the rostrum, didn't make the final. Oh, everyone knows. And I come back to a state agency because I feel it's one of the biggest challenges when you've got an audience who probably move once every, 5 or 10 years, who don't really know, so they need guidance. And there's a plethora of standards out there. Unregulated, by the way, which I think is another challenge. We'll come on to that another time. But if it was, I just feel that transparency is lacking when I compare to my previous world, if I can say that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's why I think it's so important. And that's why I do the videos I do on the TikTok, is purely on the basis that I want everybody to be able to make an informed decision. They don't have to work with me. They don't have to work with me at all, right? But if they can make an informed decision about their next chapter, then they're going to find it's a lot smoother because they're working with an agent who is absolutely, that they know within their marketplace is the true leader. And that person is not just saying things that sound nice. As an example of that, the holy grail for me is always trying to get to a best and final. If I can get to a best and final, that means I've got multiple buyers. If I've got multiple buyers, what have I done to get those multiple buyers to go beyond what the actual real market provable value is? But equally at the same time, if I get it wrong, then it's not the seller's fault that I've got it wrong. It's my fault. And if things aren't materializing as I thought they were going to do, what am I doing about it? So you take, for example, the house in Sheffield that I've just agreed. They had like 16 viewings in a day, right? Versus a house in Norwich that I thought was easy, right? It's turned out I've only got 2 viewings on that and I'm panicking. Panicking so much that I've called literally contacted 15 agents within 2-3 miles of that house saying, who have you got? Because I don't just want to turn up with just 2 viewers that may not actually turn up on the day. So again, it's just like that, taking responsibility. And if I'm getting into bed with you and I'm telling you I'm going to do something, I don't care how I'm getting there, I need to get there. Yeah. And going back to the goals thing, and I love that, right, put that yardstick or that an extra meter, benchmark, an extra meter. And like you said, in that time you had in that year, you went from 25 to 78 in those small increments, and that's how you dealt with that. Honestly, I think that's wonderful, because that means, as you said earlier in the podcast, you loved it when it was raining. You loved it when it was wet, horrible, and miserable. Basically, that tells me that your mindset was, Steve doesn't get a say. So Steve's body, Steve's like Steve wants to be comfortable. Steve doesn't get a say because we've got a goal to hit. So you're turning up. And I think, and that is like with estate agency, it's like, right, we all want easy street. We all want that, I've got loads of viewings, I'm negotiating offers, we're at best and final, brilliant. But when that doesn't happen, what are we doing about it? And
that's all that matters, right? It's that, what are we doing about it? In the circumstances that we're presented with, what are we doing about it? What are we doing to step up? And many don't. Many let that internal dialogue, and again, we've all been there, take over. And it's a really interesting one because, no one can hear anyone else's internal dialogue, but we've all got noise, right? We've all got noise. We've all got that chat, that little, Paul McKenna gave me I did that because Paul McKenna, the stage hypnotist, gave me a lovely bit of advice on that. If ever you got that moment where you got the voice in your head, he said, inside, say to yourself, shut the fuck up, right? And don't do it out loud because you look a bit weird. But if you say that, it's really interesting. If you say that, it goes quiet. And taking control of that voice is so powerful, and many don't let it get loud, let it get override, let it control, and it's usually left brain, which is analytical and disparaging and counterproductive. But if we can get into the right brain, the more creative, rhythmical side of our heads, we're in a good place. And again, that comes back to some of the soft skills that Roger and I talk about present. Some people, you're nodding because I know you get that, right? I sense it. We've never talked about that, but I know you get that. But we both know people who would not go, what the hell are you talking about? Is that a thing? Oh, you get that as well, do you? That sort of level of interpretation, of understanding. So I think, blowing a lid off all this stuff and just sharing best practice and the openness and honesty with that is super important. But yeah, love that. Get control of the inner voice is essential, especially in those pressure moments that you've talked about, to be able to then say, how do I step up? What else can we do? What am I missing? That's a positive chat.
Absolutely. And if I can just ask one last question, with the benefit of hindsight and everything that we're discussing right now, the benefit of hindsight, and the distance now from competition, how do you personally define success now? And how is it different from how you defined it when you were competing?
It's more difficult in the real world. I massively admit that, but it's probably more wholesome in a way, because in the sports world, you live in a bubble. I know that's cliched, but it's true. You do. You have no idea of the outside world, really. And you train, eat, sleep, focus, dedication towards A championships every year. And you say, "Do you have a good year?" And you go, "Well, yeah, great year. I broke the world record and got an Olympic medal, or won the European Championships, or I had a bad year. Yeah, it didn't quite work out. The champs got injured. You mentioned injury. So everything's about what's happening on the sports field. In the real world, of course, we don't have a rostrum. We don't have medals. Maybe we should. Um, we don't have the anthems, right? You don't have that moment to say, or should we? Maybe that moment to say, okay, I did well there, and rewarding ourselves is probably good advice, right? But having clearly defined goals now is less easy than it was, but probably why it's more important now than it ever was. I mentioned earlier around, time is my most favorite asset. I love it. I don't want to waste it. I'm 57 next month, and I'm thinking, I want to make sure I make good decisions that allow me to enjoy time and optimize time as best I possibly can. And that's success.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And lastly, I'm big on the self-employed agency model. I absolutely think it's the way forward. I think people that are crushing it for a business, then obviously stay in that business if you want. But if you're willing to back yourself, I think self-employed agency for me is the way forward. However, of course, it's not for everyone. Not everybody can go, handle the pressure of zero salary coming in. Where's my next valuation coming from? Now, I'm lucky. I'm very, very, very lucky that I've shared rooms with you and Roger, and of course the other guys within Real Agency. And I'm very lucky to be part of that group, because I think that that level of accountability that you speak about, that level of like, what are the numbers? And I know we don't necessarily share our individual numbers, but a lot of us do, right? And for me, working and listening with you guys, or to you guys, is that keeps me ultra accountable as well, because I'm like, well, I need to perform because I've got a group that are with me. But what would you advise any agent out there right now that is thinking about that self-employed model, whether it's EXP, whether it's Hortons, whether it's Keller Williams, and they're thinking about doing it, but they're sort of on the fence? What would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because people often make decisions because of circumstances rather than being proactive. And I just come back to, what do you want? What do you want? If you want to take control of your time, if you want to be the master of your own destiny, sounds grand, but it's true, right? If you want to hold the reins on your life and decide where you want to go by your terms, then at least have a look. That's all I'd say. Yeah, you're right. It's not for everyone, because, a lot of people don't strive for anything more than average, that's okay. If it's okay for you, but don't complain about it. And I think, you mentioned the phrase, you used the phrase earlier, step up. You have to step up. It's what I love about the independent estate agency model, because you can't come in and be average. You can't. You don't work. Because let's be honest, the average estate agent is, I'll let you finish that sentence.
Shit.
I thought you might say something like, I'd probably agree. It's because there's lack of transparency, there's lack of, all the stuff that we've talked about. And therefore, we're only after the good ones. And therefore, it's a brand that is synonymous with the Olympic mindset. Because you can't be an average athlete and go, I'm going to the Olympics. Well, you got to step up, mate. You got to do things differently, because what got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. You're going to have to change. You're going to have to develop. You're going to have to strive. So I think there's so many parallels back to what we did. And I just say, yeah, sorry, I repeat myself, have a look. And if it's not for you, that's absolutely fine.
Absolutely. Steve Backley OBE, thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure and I'm so grateful.
Thank you, John. Likewise, and thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Right, so if there's one thing I'm taking from this conversation, it's this. Success is a decision, not a medal, not a title, not a lucky break, a decision. Steve didn't become one of Britain's most consistent athletes because the conditions were perfect. He did it because when it rained, when the pressure built, when expectations were loud, he leaned in. He controlled the controllables. He moved the stick 1 metre further. He refused to be average, and that applies to sport, right? But it absolutely applies to a state agency. When the viewings are quiet, when the sale falls through, when the internal voice gets loud, you either fold, you stay stable, or you thrive. The real question is this: which one are you? Steve Backley OBE, thank you so much again for coming on this podcast. It has been amazing and I am truly blessed. And to everyone else listening, move the stick. See you on the next episode.